Assalamu alaikum, Angelica.
Walaikum salam.
It's so good to see you. As we were just chatting about before I hit record on this, it's been a little while since I got a chance to talk with you. And so I'm just like really grateful to have this opportunity to sit down with you, even though I know you're like on the go. You had some curveballs happen in your day as we increasingly are dealing with in the year 2026. But I'm super grateful just to have this opportunity to have this chat with you. This is like, our series of Muslim Futures author chats where the idea is we're sitting down with each one of our co-creators in this beautiful anthology, which is coming soon to a bookstore near you for all of you out in the internet that are watching this. Um, and so I think, the idea behind this is like to be able to chat with you a little bit about your story, the inspiration for your story, but also like the way that it maybe creates a lens on how you think about anything from like the genre that your story sits in, from science fiction or magical realism, to how it is a manifestation of your own personal spirituality, knowing that that is, a little bit or a lot different from author to author. We all have very personal relationships with our spirituality. And so that's, increasingly interesting for me to kind of dig into with everybody as I have all these conversations with you all. Um, and then also, like, I'd be remiss if I didn't call attention to the fact that, like, we're having this conversation in the beginning of the year 2026, which is a really challenging and really chaotic time. And, like, thinking about, like, what was it like for us to be able to envision aspirational futures, like with the dystopia that kind of surrounds us. And so I'm really excited to have this opportunity, this excuse to sit down with you for a little bit and chat about how that kind of manifests for you. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited. Sometimes some conversations feel like home, and it's nice to be able to talk about these things because there are not a lot of people in my life who understand like my obsession with like science fiction and Afrofuturism and Islam and spirituality. So yes, you're hitting all the marks here.
Amazing. Amazing. We are home. This conversation is home
Yes.
for me as well. So thank you for
Yes.
providing this container for us. Maybe you can just start by telling us the title of your story and giving us a little bit of an overview as to what it's about.
Sure. Okay. The title of the story is The Mother Has Returned. And it's actually the meaning of the name of one of the main characters in the story. So the story centers around a woman, Rahma, who's a part of a community called the Returned. And a little bit of the backstory is that these are African American people who were put into a form of neo slavery at some point in our not so distant future. And then they were saved by a sheikh who came from Senegal and mounted a rebellion, and they're living in like an enclave in like the southwestern desert. So there's a bit of an autobiographical element there because that is where I'm sitting right now. And Rahma is sort of tasked with going on a mission. She's not exactly sure what it is she's supposed to do, but she's feeling stuck where she is with the return. She knows that there's something more to her. She has a very deep connection with her grandmother and with her foremothers. She's not a particularly religious person, but all of the returned are Muslim by identity, if not necessarily by practice. They're living at a time where people pray by avatar. They don't really they don't really engage in like spirituality. And her quest takes her to Mecca, or so she thinks. But within the story, she winds up getting transported to West Africa, and then that is where a lot of that magical realism and things start to take place.
Hmm. Amazing. Thank you. It's this story, it's so funny because like as I was saying, like we haven't talked about this story for a little while. And I don't know how recently you revisited it, but it still sounds like so present and so clear for you, like in your mind. It's like the story, you're like living with this story. Um, which is no small thing because I think in your story in particular, you're juggling and navigating like multiple timelines and multiple periods through history. And like I'm always really impressed when authors can like create like a very far flung future and really sort of chart the pathway from where we are now, like in the reality that, Angelica and Kareem are sitting in right now, and chart the pathway through to the aspirational future that we're in. And I think that there's a lot of things that you kind of alluded to just now in terms of the synopsis and premise for the story that I think are really integral to the world building that you did with this particular project. And I'm really curious to hear about how you decided on what the aspirational parts of this future were and what that necessitated for you in terms of thinking through, you referenced a new age of slavery between now, the reality that we're in, and the future that we're actually centered in the story. And so, for you to progress, like chart out this aspirational future, we had to move through this even darker time that we're in right now. And I'm really interested to hear you speak a little bit about how you designed the aspirational world that your story starts in, because as we were also talking about it a minute ago, you're traversing multiple timelines. So I just want to hear you talk a little bit about what was your world building process and your sort of your creative process in thinking through where do I want to root this story, and then what does that mean we need to move through the darkness in order to get there.
I didn't know that there was like an exact term for something I had been doing for my whole life, which is world building. I was definitely one of those children who we had a peach tree in our backyard. And when my father would cut the branches, like prune the branches, they would sit outside for a while. And I used to imagine like that was like my star cruiser. I was very much like that child who like wanted to be a Jedi when I grew up, and I never really thought about there being like a term for it. So I think I was familiar with the process of world building because I'm a person who daydreams a lot, but I'm also a cultural historian and someone who focuses a lot on ancestral trauma. So I knew that the world building that I wanted to do in the story had to bring those elements of history and the historic trauma that Black people in particular have faced. And so I was looking at where are we situated now in our current society, and what would I like to see in our future? And so I had to then also go back and think the world has ended so many times for so many people, for our grandparents, for our ancestors who've been involved in like colonialism and slavery and genocide. And what was their future like? Were we a part of their aspirational future? So that's where I got the idea to sort of work with these multiple timelines at once. And I wanted, because I remember when we all got together and we were like, in our world building sessions and we were talking, one of the things that we were talking about is how would we exist as Muslim people without these isms and other, issues
Mm,
that are present. And I'll be honest, it took a long time for me to get past that because that's sort of the lens that we look through at all times. And the one thing that I knew, any aspirational future that I think about, whether that's in writing or just in living or in dua, I'm always thinking about what would it be like to know exactly where I came from?
mm,
Like, what would it be like to know exactly what lineage I'm a part of, what place I came from? What would it be like to know the name of my great 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 grandmother? So that was where I situated my world building in answering that question for myself. And then also thinking, as I was thinking through that process, I thought about like my children. So I have a son who never got to meet my father. My father died when I was 16. But when I look at my son, he looks just like my dad. He has mannerisms like my father. He says things sometimes and it's eerie because he sounds like my dad. He's never met him. I was 16. I was like, boys are gross. I don't ever want to get married. So I had no idea I would even have children. And so that just further elucidated the idea that, okay, Angelica, you need to deal with multiple realities existing at one space and time.
mm,
And this idea, Toni Morrison talks about this idea of rememory. The place that is in our memory still exists. It's still there because it exists within our memory. And so I try to fold all of that into this short story, which kind of then, honestly, as I was writing it, it kind of took over my life. And like since then, I find myself frequently going back to the story and wondering like how would this fit into the trajectory of the story. So yeah, that was sort of the process.
Um, That's amazing. I'm really struck by how, sometimes when we're talking about world building, we're talking about like inventing new systems and totally new societies and thinking about like what does every manner of society, every facet of society look like in this world. And sometimes world building is really just like a very deeply sort of personal act in terms of thinking about, if I'm trying to envision an aspirational world, it's more about generating the feeling of what does that look like? And I'm really struck by that in terms of you speaking about an aspirational future being rooted in um, a protagonist really having a deep personal, like physical understanding of what their lineage is. And that is the aspirational piece of this world that was like the seed that germinated everything else around it. Because there is a lot of like also broad, wide systemic stuff that you created there too. But it's really cool to hear about how like the aspirational piece of it started with the feeling. Um, and so I'm really encouraged by that. I love hearing that. I'm also glad that we could give you a name to the thing that you've been doing for your entire life. Um, I so I'm also just really interested to hear you speak a little bit about perhaps selfishly, like, what was it about this project that, like, made you kinda wanna do this? I know, like, you have sort of a variety of different sort of facets to your creative practice, and once we started working together, I was really overjoyed to hear how much you, like, are such a genre fan and a genre nerd, and so, like, being able to, like, provide that opportunity for you to manifest that was really awesome to see. But I'm curious, like, from your perspective, like, what is it about the idea of a Muslim future that was kind of exciting to you? And what is it about sort of this project that aggregates a variety of different Muslim futures that maybe resonates with you personally or creatively?
You know, I so you had me at future. You had me at futures, and you had me at writing. I devour books. Like I think I read 165 books last year.
My god.
I yes, I don't even watch television. Like, I was definitely that child that would prefer a book over television because books just read like movies to me, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, it doesn't matter. And I've written a lot of nonfiction. I've written a lot of like, factual, informational, like articles. I have a book that I did, but I wanted to see, could I create a world? So that was first. I was really sort of enamored with the idea of like trying my hand at fiction. And then just selfishly, as a Muslim convert, I'm the only Muslim in my family. Anytime I'm able to be a part of something Muslim, I feel held and I feel seen. I feel witnessed in a way that I've always wanted to be, but always didn't put myself out there for it. And I loved working on the project because there were we're all coming from so many different angles, so many different like ways of life. And if you sat us all like at a lunch table, would we all sit together? Maybe not, because we wouldn't know that we have this one sort of invisible thread that's binding us all together. And then reading the stories and just doing the world building sessions, it really just made me love the genre more because I really feel like science fiction is a space where you just put everybody in the pot, and then we just figure it out. And like, there's just so much brilliance that comes and so much commonality that comes. And I really like the idea of a Muslim Futures project because so much of the language around Muslims is rooted in the past and what we did before and tradition and culture. There's not this idea that Muslims will be present in the future. And I loved that idea, just that basic premise. So it was something that I was really happy to I would have been happy to be a consumer of the product, right? I would have been happy to be a reader, right? If I had heard like, "Oh, Muslim Futures book," I'm like, "I'm doing my pre-order right now." But then to be a part of someone who's creating I could not have asked for anything better.
I'm so glad to hear that. That makes me so happy. I mean, I selfishly kind of approached it a similar way, which is like I don't often have the opportunity to be like in a room with like 15 other like super intersectional, like Muslim writers and artists and creatives. And like, I was like, I want that experience. I want that experience for me. Like, I want to be
Yes.
in that space. And so I think it is something that was really rare. And, yeah, to be able to do that in a space where we're not really defined by our history, where we're not being defined by our trauma, and we can choose the aspects of our personal and emotional and cultural identities that we want to manifest and root a future in, like that was selfishly for me, like very similarly, like a really amazing thing. So I'm glad that that you had a similar experience. And speaking of like the consumers of these stories, like I'm also interested to hear like, you know, not that it has to be one thing, but like what is one thing or two things that you kind of hope that a reader is going to take away from your story in particular?
One thing I hope that a reader will take away from my story is people who know me as being in one lane in terms of, things that I normally do or things that I normally talk about. I hope that it will disrupt their perception of who I am. The other thing that I really hope the readers will take away is this idea that a Muslim future, the Muslim future, has a variety of people who are present, and not everything has to be reinvented. Not everything from the past is bad. There's an idea in my mind of an ancient future, which is where the future really rests on this foundation of ancient technology. And I hope that people see just little glimpses of things that are familiar to them, but are maybe presented in a new and sort of innovative way. So I want people to sort of be shaken a little bit in what they assume something is, and when they read the story, they find out that it could be possibly rendered differently. So I'm really excited about that part, the curiosity aspect.
I love that. I'm excited about that too. I think so often we think about a future as being like hyper modern as opposed to being rooted in some things that we have lost as a people and as a society that we might be desperately in need of.
Exactly.
Um, and I think about that a lot, especially now as like, we're living in the year 2026 in like late stage capitalism, creeping fascism, all of these things that, in the grand scheme of human life and human civilization are like relatively recent inventions. And so I think a lot about like, you know, indigeneity and like cultural traditions that we've lost over the years that have kind of gotten us to this place that we're in right now. And for me, like that underscores like the value of a lot of these stories that really draw upon cultural traditions that are so necessary right now and indigeneity. And, you know, that for me is one of the most significant things about this story and the kinds of imagination that are in this whole anthology. And from your perspective, um, I'm curious to hear you speak about this, especially because, we were living in a very different time the last time you and I spoke about this story. And as you think about your story, and in particular, I'm thinking about the way that society moves through even darker times before it arrives at an aspirational future. I'm curious to hear you speak a little bit about, what do you think is the significance or the importance of envisioning an aspirational world as we're, sitting here living through like a creeping dystopia?
I've always been a believer that hope is a vital part of any freedom fighter or radical revolutionary's arsenal. Like, you have to have hope. That is what drives the work. That's what drives the mission. If you cannot imagine what a liberated future looks like, then how can you do your work effectively? You have to be working towards a goal. And with that being said, I also believe that we are at a critical point in history where societies are crumbling and monopolies are expanding, but also imploding at the same time. And what we think a dystopia looks like is not necessarily going to be like the Book of Eli, right? The movie, The Book of Eli. It's not going to be like this Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome scape, right? It can look just like, a sunny day in a library parking lot, like where I am right now. Uh, but it's understanding that with the genocide and the political fascism that exists, things are going to get worse. But this is exactly the point in history where artists and creatives and writers have to stand up and step up and show people this is what we're working towards. So, all of the things that we're dealing with right now, this is the ultimate goal. And that's where I see this project situated that, yes, the people who want to get rid of Muslims, we're going to be here. We're going to be in the future. And here are 16 stories that talk about what that future could possibly look like. So I think that it's important to keep that frame of reference there, because it's everything else is seeking to tear us down. So we have to have spaces where we can build ourselves up and also build worlds that we want to be a part of.
That is very, very well said. That is so well said. And just hearing you say that, like, is giving me hope. I feel like we have to keep reaffirming that hope. And so hopefully, like, as you said, these 16 stories will give us like 16 more affirmations of hope at the moments that we need them.
Absolutely.
Um, I'm really grateful to have had a chance to sit down and talk with you, Angelica, about your story. I'm so excited to share it with the world. I'm really excited to hear what readers think about the world that you've built and the characters that you've constructed. And I can't wait to share it. So, for everybody who is watching this, I hope you're gonna pre-order your copy of Muslim Futures and click the link in the comments or below the section where this will be, and pre-order your copy of Muslim Futures right now. Thank you so much, Angelica, for this chat. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for letting me be a part of this project. This is what
Oh my God,
the young people say, a core memory. This will be a core memory for me. I hope,
I love that.
inshallah, one day I'm a grandmother and I get to talk to my grandchildren about being a part of the classic Muslim Futures anthology,
I love
inshallah.
it. Love it. Thank you for joining this project. I was collaborating with you was such a joy.